The dry desert wind carried a faint scent of sagebrush and dust along the quiet streets of Roswell, New Mexico, on the evening of June 7, 2003. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving streaks of orange and purple bleeding across the sky. 19-year-old Marisol Torres hurried along the cracked sidewalks of her neighborhood, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She had spent the day working at her part-time job at the small local cafe, saving every dollar for her plans to study graphic design at the University of New Mexico. Her father, Hector Torres, had called her from the driveway just as she stepped onto the street. "Marisol, be careful," he shouted, his voice tinged with worry. Marisol waved back without turning, her mind already occupied with thoughts of the sketching class she had signed up for and the new computer program she wanted to master. She was meticulous and responsible, traits that had earned her respect among her peers and her teachers alike. Yet that evening, nothing about the ordinary felt extraordinary until it became horrifyingly so. By 8:15 p.m., Marisol had disappeared. The last confirmed sighting was by a neighbor who noticed her jogging lightly toward the corner near Desert Lane and 11th Street. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting elongated shadows across the cracked pavement. A blue sedan passed slowly behind her, its windows slightly tinted, engine humming softly. No one could have known that this ordinary car, ordinary street, and ordinary evening would become the epicenter of a mystery that would remain unsolved for nearly 2 decades. By 9:20 p.m., Marisol's mother, Lucia Torres, began to worry. It was unusual for her daughter to be late. She first called her cell phone, which went straight to voicemail. Then she tried Marisol's friends, neighbors, anyone who might have seen her. By 9:30, fear had replaced worry. The police were called. Sheriff Ramon Aguilar, a man with over 20 years in law enforcement, personally took the initial report. He and 2 deputies began the first sweeps, combing nearby streets and the open desert paths surrounding the residential area. But Marisol was nowhere to be found. The investigation officially began on June 8th. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, interviewed neighbors, and checked local businesses. Security footage from the small grocery store at the corner was examined, showing Marisol passing by at 8:12 p.m., still carrying her backpack. Nothing appeared out of place. Witnesses reported a blue sedan, as mentioned, but the details were scarce. A vague description, a license plate partially obscured by a fast-moving sunbeam, caught in the surveillance footage. Early leads pointed to someone familiar with the area, someone who could move unnoticed through the quiet streets of Roswell. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Search parties combed the desert floor, aided by the K-9 units and drones where available. Volunteers distributed flyers featuring Marisol's smiling face, her brown eyes wide and hopeful, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders in waves. But the case grew colder with each passing day. Tip lines produced sporadic leads, most of which proved fruitless. A local handyman recalled seeing a vehicle, matching the description of the blue sedan parked near the neighborhood, just a day before Marisol's disappearance. But his memory was unclear and the lead went nowhere. Marisol's family never gave up. They held vigils every month on the anniversary of her disappearance. Candlelight flickered in the desert night as neighbors, friends, and family gathered, calling out her name, hoping against hope that someone, anyone, might come forward with a clue. The local news covered these gatherings, emphasizing the human tragedy behind the unresolved investigation. Community members began taking precautions. Parents drove children to and from school. Neighbors watched over one another, and a lingering sense of unease settled across Roswell. Evidence collected during the initial investigation was carefully preserved. Forensic teams retrieved soil samples from areas where Marisol was last seen, fingerprints from nearby mailboxes, and items from the vicinity of the blue sedan sightings. Among these items were traces of fabric fibers and a partial fingerprint on a discarded soda can. The technology available in 2003 limited the ability to fully process and compare these samples, leaving critical gaps in the investigation. Still, law enforcement filed everything meticulously, knowing that someday, advances in forensic science could provide the breakthrough they desperately needed. In 2004, investigators revisited the case as part of a departmental review of unsolved disappearances in Chaves County. They re-interviewed witnesses, reanalyzed the limited physical evidence, and explored patterns in similar regional disappearances. No concrete connections were found. The blue sedan remained an elusive lead. Witness statements conflicted, and the partial license plate continued to frustrate efforts to identify its owner. By the end of the year, the case was officially classified as a cold case, pending future advances in technology that might uncover the truth. Over the next decade, Marisol's story persisted in the collective memory of the town. Her family continued their advocacy, urging residents to report any suspicious activity, maintaining hope that one day the pieces of the puzzle would come together. The police department occasionally revisited the file, re-examining the preserved evidence with new techniques, but without a DNA match or a credible lead, the case remained unresolved. In early 2019, a breakthrough began in the most unexpected way. The Chaves County Sheriff's Office had received new funding for cold case investigations, including specialized training in forensic DNA analysis and vehicle-based evidence. Lieutenant Carla Moreno, newly appointed to lead the cold case unit, identified Marisol Torres' disappearance as a prime candidate for review. She noted the preserved cigarette butt collected near the corner of Desert Lane and 11th Street, an item that had gone untested due to the limitations of technology at the time. The cigarette butt underwent advanced DNA profiling using methods unavailable in 2003. The analysis produced a partial profile that matched neither the victim nor any known offenders in the national database. Lieutenant Moreno authorized the use of genetic genealogy, uploading the DNA profile to publicly available databases to identify potential familial matches. It was meticulous work, involving constructing family trees and narrowing the pool of potential suspects with careful consideration of geographic and historical factors. By mid-2020, the investigation had identified a single potential suspect, James Whitaker, a man with no prior record of violent crime, living within 20 miles of Roswell at the time of Marisol's disappearance. Whitaker's vehicle, a blue 1997 sedan, matched the description from 2003, including the partial license plate noted in witness statements. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses corroborated his presence in the neighborhood around the time Marisol vanished. Investigators began discreetly collecting additional DNA samples, using trash and discarded items to confirm the initial match without alerting Whitaker. The results were undeniable. DNA collected from a cigarette butt Whitaker had discarded outside his residence in 2020 matched the genetic profile recovered from evidence near the disappearance scene with near certainty. This breakthrough provided the foundation for securing a search warrant and moving forward with the case that had haunted Roswell for nearly 2 decades. Law enforcement executed the warrant cautiously, aware of the sensitivity surrounding a cold case of such duration. Whitaker was taken into custody without incident. Items recovered from his vehicle and residence further corroborated his involvement, including personal effects that connected him to the areas Marisol had been seen, and, crucially, trace evidence consistent with the original forensic findings from 2003. Marisol's family, upon hearing the news of the arrest, experienced a mixture of emotions: relief, grief, validation, and sorrow for the years lost without answers. The arrest did not erase the past, but it brought a sense of closure, and the promise that the investigation could finally reveal the truth of what had happened to their daughter. The case underscored the power of patience, perseverance, and scientific advancement. It illustrated how carefully preserved evidence, combined with modern forensic techniques, can solve mysteries that have lingered for decades, providing answers to families who have never stopped seeking the truth. For Roswell, the case was a reminder that even in a small town, dark secrets can remain hidden, but they are never beyond discovery. The arrest of James Whitaker in late 2020 sent ripples through Roswell. For 17 years, the town had quietly mourned Marisol Torres, her disappearance a shadow that lingered in neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces. Now suddenly, the case that had long been dormant roared back into life. Lieutenant Carla Moreno coordinated with the district attorney's office to review every piece of evidence collected in 2003, ensuring nothing had been overlooked. Files that had sat untouched for nearly 2 decades were examined with renewed vigor. Each page, each photograph, each forensic note scrutinized. From the outset, Whitaker had appeared cooperative, but investigators remained cautious. A man with no prior criminal record, his public persona had been that of a quiet, reserved neighbor, someone who blended into the fabric of the community. He owned a small landscaping business, often seen tending to yards for elderly residents or volunteering for local school events. Neighbors were stunned. How could someone so seemingly ordinary be linked to an unsolved abduction that had haunted the community for years? Revisiting the evidence, Moreno and her team noted the cigarette butt had been discovered near the intersection where Marisol had last been seen, less than 100 feet from her usual jogging route. Advances in DNA technology meant that even degraded samples could now provide genetic profiles accurate enough for identification. The forensic laboratory conducted a complete review of trace evidence from 2003, reanalyzing soil samples, fibers, and fingerprints. Fibers found on the sidewalk near the intersection, previously untestable, matched materials recovered from Whitaker's vehicle. Fingerprints collected from a discarded soda can near the corner were consistent with his prints. The accumulation of this evidence began to paint a compelling narrative, connecting him to the crime scene beyond reasonable doubt. In addition to forensic evidence, investigators reviewed Whitaker's known movements from 2003. Telephone records showed he had been in the Roswell area on the evening of June 7, 2003, precisely at the time Marisol disappeared. Surveillance footage from local stores, captured from security cameras operational in 2003, but never fully examined, revealed a blue sedan parked near Desert Lane around 8:10 p.m. Its windows reflected the fading evening light, but the partial license plate, once indecipherable, could now be enhanced using modern digital imaging. The letters aligned with Whitaker's vehicle registration. It was a breakthrough that linked him directly to the vicinity of Marisol's last known location. The detectives then began interviewing acquaintances of Whitaker, exploring whether any suspicious behavior had been observed in 2003. Former employees of his landscaping company recalled that he often lingered late at client homes under the guise of completing extra work, sometimes asking questions about the family's routines or when children would be home. Neighbors remembered fleeting odd interactions, dismissed at the time as harmless curiosity. When viewed through the lens of the current investigation, these minor details now seemed unsettlingly prescient. In preparation for prosecution, the district attorney convened a team to meticulously reconstruct the events of June 7, 2003. This included creating a timeline, starting with Marisol's departure from her part-time job around 7:55 p.m., her last confirmed sightings, and the moment her jog ended abruptly. The reconstructed timeline incorporated modern forensic analysis of soil disturbances, fibers, and trace evidence found in Whitaker's car. Analysts compared it to the patterns typically seen in abduction cases, concluding that the likelihood of Marisol leaving the area voluntarily was virtually non-existent. The investigation also revisited the psychological impact on the community. For 17 years, families had instilled caution in their children, awareness of surroundings and vigilance in everyday routines. Schools conducted safety seminars, parents adjusted driving routines, and local law enforcement maintained a heightened sense of watchfulness. Now the arrest prompted a reflection on the long-term effects of unresolved cases in small towns. The detectives recognized that while science had uncovered the perpetrator, the emotional scars remained. Families, friends, and neighbors grappled with a complex mix of relief, anger, and lingering grief. Whitaker's interrogation followed standard legal protocols. Confronted with the DNA evidence linking him to the scene, he initially denied involvement, citing memory lapses and asserting that he had no reason to be near Desert Lane that evening. The detectives, patient and methodical, presented the accumulation of evidence: the enhanced license plate, fiber matches, soil analysis, and forensic correlations from items within his vehicle. Over multiple sessions, the weight of undeniable proof began to unravel his story. By early 2021, prosecutors were confident they had sufficient evidence to move forward with formal charges. Marisol's family, although traumatized by the thought of revisiting the case in court, welcomed the news. They saw the legal proceedings as a path toward closure, an opportunity for the truth to finally be publicly acknowledged. Local media coverage intensified, chronicling the journey from cold case to arrest, highlighting the pivotal role of modern forensic technology and the tireless dedication of law enforcement officers who had never abandoned hope. During pre-trial proceedings, defense attorneys attempted to challenge the validity of the DNA evidence and the reliability of genetic genealogy methods. They argued that samples collected from discarded items could be contaminated or misattributed. Expert witnesses for the prosecution countered with detailed explanations of chain-of-custody protocols, laboratory procedures, and error margins. They demonstrated that the probability of a false match was astronomically low, reinforcing the credibility of the forensic evidence. Throughout this period, Marisol's parents became active advocates for cold case reform and the adoption of advanced forensic techniques nationwide. They shared their story at community meetings and law enforcement conferences, emphasizing the importance of evidence preservation and the hope that science could eventually bring justice even after decades. Their advocacy inspired other families whose loved ones remained missing to revisit their own unresolved cases, fostering collaboration between families and police departments across the state. As preparations for the trial continued, investigators also sought to understand the motivations and behavioral patterns of Whitaker. Reviewing his history, they discovered that while outwardly he had maintained a quiet, unobtrusive lifestyle, there were subtle indicators of obsessive tendencies. For instance, he had maintained detailed notes of neighborhood routines, schedules, and observed behaviors over several months in 2003. Investigators concluded that these notes suggested premeditation, careful planning, and an awareness of potential obstacles, which explained why the abduction had gone unsolved for so long. Community response to these revelations was profound. Residents struggled to reconcile the image of a friendly, quiet neighbor with the reality of his involvement in Marisol's disappearance. Counseling services were offered to those directly impacted, and public forums provided spaces for communal reflection and processing of collective trauma. The case became a benchmark example in discussions on the hidden dangers that can lurk behind seemingly ordinary facades, highlighting the need for vigilance, community engagement, and support networks for families of missing persons. Through all these developments, Marisol's story remained central. Her life, ambitions, and unfulfilled potential were honored in local remembrance ceremonies. Scholarships and community art programs were established in her name, focusing on creativity, resilience, and advocacy. Her family worked to ensure that the memory of her aspirations, studying graphic design, pursuing photography, and building a meaningful career, would continue to inspire young people in Roswell. The combination of meticulous police work, preserved evidence, modern forensic science, and genetic genealogy had transformed a 17-year-old cold case into a story of justice served. It demonstrated that time does not erase accountability, and that persistence, coupled with innovation, can illuminate even the darkest corners of unresolved crimes. For Marisol Torres' family, the arrest was not the end, but it was the first tangible step toward understanding, acknowledgement, and eventual healing. The courtroom in Roswell was tense the morning of March 15, 2021. Residents, local media, and family members filled every available seat. For 17 years, Marisol Torres' disappearance had haunted the town. Now seated at the defendant's table, James Whitaker faced the culmination of decades of investigation, evidence preservation, and forensic breakthroughs. The air felt thick with anticipation, sorrow, and the collective need for answers. Prosecutor Elaine Rodriguez began by recounting the timeline of June 7, 2003, meticulously connecting Marisol's departure from her job, the last confirmed sightings, and the location where her personal belongings were found abandoned. She presented forensic evidence with clarity: the cigarette butt containing Whitaker's DNA, the fibers in his vehicle matching materials near the scene, and the enhanced license plate footage linking him to Desert Lane at the critical time. Each detail reinforced the narrative that Whitaker had been present when Marisol vanished. Rodriguez then shifted focus to Whitaker's behavior over the years. Surveillance from 2003, combined with eyewitness testimony from former employees and neighbors, painted a picture of calculated opportunity. He had observed routines, asked probing questions under innocuous pretenses, and used his seemingly ordinary presence to mask premeditation. The prosecutor emphasized how Whitaker's outward normalcy had allowed him to blend into the community while maintaining proximity to the ongoing investigation through subtle observation of searches and community responses. During cross-examination, defense attorneys attempted to challenge the reliability of genetic genealogy, suggesting that DNA collected from discarded items could be misattributed or contaminated. Expert witnesses for the prosecution addressed these claims, detailing laboratory protocols, chain of custody procedures, and error margins, effectively dismantling the defense's assertions. The scientific explanation of genetic genealogy captivated the courtroom, highlighting how modern techniques could solve crimes that had remained unresolved for decades. Marisol's parents, Lucia and Antonio Torres, attended every day of the proceedings, their emotions ranging from restrained composure to visible anguish. They listened as the evidence of premeditation, the sequence of events, and the calculated actions of Whitaker were laid bare. Their grief, though decades old, was reignited with every detail. Yet amid the sorrow, there was a tangible sense of relief, the acknowledgement of truth after so many years of uncertainty. On the third day of testimony, Detective Carla Moreno recounted the painstaking work of linking Whitaker to the scene. She described how the cigarette butt had been preserved for years, initially overlooked in terms of its potential to provide a DNA match. It was the advent of advanced sequencing and genetic genealogy that unlocked the connection, demonstrating the importance of evidence preservation even when technology does not yet exist to fully utilize it. Moreno's testimony highlighted how scientific innovation had directly brought closure to a family and a community. Whitaker's demeanor remained mostly impassive, though subtle signs of discomfort appeared as the weight of the evidence was revealed. Prosecutors presented fiber matches between his vehicle and the area where Marisol's belongings were found. Soil analysis, linking particles from his tires to the crime scene, and historical notes he had kept documenting neighborhood routines. These cumulative pieces of evidence formed an irrefutable chain, leaving the jury with little room for doubt. Victim impact statements were delivered toward the trial's conclusion. Friends and neighbors recounted the ripple effects of Marisol's disappearance over 17 years, how children were walked to school under heightened caution, how community trust had subtly eroded, and how the unresolved mystery had cast a shadow on the town's sense of safety. These statements were heartfelt, underscoring that while the crime had been singular, its consequences had been felt universally. The final day of the trial brought a turning point. Confronted with the overwhelming weight of evidence, Whitaker offered a confession. In a monotone voice, he admitted to encountering Marisol on Desert Lane that evening. He described how he had offered her a ride under the guise of assistance, how she had refused, and how in a moment of irrational anger he had abducted her. The courtroom fell silent as he detailed the steps taken to conceal her, the transportation to a remote location, and the measures to hide evidence. While his account was clinical, it provided crucial clarity, answering questions that had lingered for nearly 2 decades. Sentencing followed swiftly. Judge Nathaniel Barrett spoke directly to Whitaker, emphasizing the betrayal of trust and the premeditated nature of his actions. Whitaker was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a resolution that, while unable to undo the trauma inflicted, provided a legal acknowledgement of justice achieved. In the aftermath, Roswell began the slow process of healing. Marisol's family continued advocacy efforts for cold case resolution and forensic innovation, partnering with local law enforcement to encourage proper preservation of evidence and the use of emerging technologies. Scholarships and community programs were established in Marisol's honor, emphasizing resilience, safety awareness, and the value of supporting families affected by violent crime. The case had a ripple effect beyond Roswell. It highlighted the transformative potential of genetic genealogy, inspiring other jurisdictions to revisit cold cases with preserved evidence. Across the state, law enforcement agencies began reviewing decades-old files, knowing that advances in forensic science could finally provide answers long denied. For Marisol's family, each solved case reaffirmed the importance of perseverance, patience, and hope. Reflecting on the impact, Detective Moreno noted that while Whitaker had attempted to erase Marisol from public memory, the combination of preserved evidence, scientific advancements, and unwavering investigative dedication ensured that her story was reclaimed. Marisol's name, her life, and the truth of what happened would no longer remain hidden. 17 years after the night Marisol Torres vanished, the town of Roswell could finally begin to reconcile. Whitaker's arrest, confession, and sentencing offered closure, but also a stark reminder that appearances could deceive. A quiet neighbor, a familiar face in the community could hide unimaginable darkness. Yet in the persistence of law enforcement, the dedication of family, and the power of science, even the deepest mysteries could be illuminated and justice could be served. Today, Marisol's memory lives on in Roswell through scholarships, community programs, and an enduring commitment to never forget those lost. Her story stands as a testament to the power of perseverance, the impact of technological progress, and the hope that, no matter how much time passes, truth can prevail. For those following the evolution of cold case investigations, Marisol Torres' case serves as a powerful example. Evidence, when preserved and revisited with modern tools, has the power to rewrite the ending of even the longest-standing mysteries.